welcome to Referendum TV. Today I'm joined by Lawyers for Yes Representative Jonathon Mitchell. Hello Jonathan, how are you?
I'm fine, I hope you are too.
I'm okay, yeah, yes. I'm getting there. How do you see things going in the referendum at the moment?
I think it's utterly unpredictable. I think the two campaigns are right to say that. I think that the problem that they've both had is that the people of Scotland have taken over this campaign from the official campaigns. And as we all know, this has infused and invigorated the ordinary people of Scotland in a way that no general election has ever done. And we are getting people who are becoming interested in these issues, becoming interested in politics in a way they've never done before.
Can you substantiate that? I mean, have you got any anecdotes that you can tell us?
Yes. Last month, I've twice been buttonholed at a bus stop in Edinburgh. So
for viewers, the Firth of Edinburgh, that's a very unusual phenomenon to happen.
By people just chatting about the referendum. Constantly hearing when I'm walking along the street or just sitting down somewhere, people behind me talking about this. Typically one person trying to persuade somebody else of what they should do, talking about the issues, all aspects of the issues. I've never heard people talking about political issues in any way like this before. But it's the universality of that, the fact that it's not just the odd conversation, it happens all the time.
So people get the significance of this?
They get the significance of it, they get the importance of the choice they're making. They didn't need to be told patronisingly that this is not like a general election and that they're voting this way for a generation or for the future. They knew that.
Do you think aspects of the official campaigns have been patronising?
Yes, they have. I think the whole degree to which we've been told, and here I do become partisan on the no side, look children, you couldn't possibly do this. You know, people are being treated like somebody who wants to leave the family home and being told, how could you do that? You don't even know how to buy a loaf of bread. Who would talk to you if you weren't a member of this household? I think a lot of this has been patronising when we are told on the no side that we will be in effect an international pariah, that nobody would want us to join NATO.
Are you thinking of George Robertson's comments in particular here?
Well, George Robertson went beyond patronising, and to be fair to the no people, he's been quite exceptional on this, in a way that's clearly driven by the fact that George Robertson has as good connections now with Scotland as I do with Washington DC. You know, he's away from it. And when he talks about this being a vote that will be welcomed by, to use his phrase, the forces of darkness.
Yes.
This, I think, must have led to the official no people just pulling the blankets over their heads in horror.
Well, the forces of darkness, I think J.K. Rowling came out with the term Death Eaters or Darkness Eaters or something like that.
No, I think to be fair, she didn't. And she was talking here, about the trolls on Twitter.
Oh, right.
The people, largely, I think, from England and Ireland, actually, who are blackguarding her on Twitter.
Right.
Twitter's not covered itself in glory, of course, in this campaign.
Well, as a Twitter activist, I would take issue with that, but that's an argument for another time.
Yeah.
But if we come back to the scaremongering and the condescension that's been displayed, the everyday person in Scotland is kind of given that short shrift, really, as you say, and starting to conduct their own research.
Yes.
Into more substantial matters in terms of law, which is, your background.
Yes.
The recent pronouncements or the vow of more powers. How did that greet you?
I thought it was so funny, I have to say, when they came out of this as an act of sheer panic and they said that they were cancelling Prime Minister's questions and they were all flying up. Initially, I think what they were thinking of was doing joint appearances, and then they thought better of that. It was hilarious. If you go backwards a little bit on this, you'll recall that the things they came up to tell us were things that they said last year we couldn't be allowed to vote upon. And they came out with good reasons why they couldn't be allowed to vote on it. The fact that these were questions for the rest of the UK to decide.
Yeah.
That you couldn't impose a federal or semi-federal constitution on England, Wales and Northern Ireland without asking them if they were prepared to have this. Now they suddenly come out with these ideas and just say, we'll do this. Of course, it's not clear yet what they're going to do. If you look at the small print, they say that they promise to have a timetable for doing something, but they don't say what.
So you're very sceptical then, would that be fair to say?
I have to say, in their favour, I do accept that there has been a deathbed conversion on the part of Cameron, Clegg, Miliband to the idea that they have got to do something about this, that they've got to shove a finger in the dike and keep it there.
It's an interesting image because a deathbed conversion still results in death.
Yes, indeed. But what I don't accept is that they have the power that they believe they have over their parties. I think we've heard a lot of Conservative backbench MPs from England express outrage about this, and they are right, that what's happening is that they're being offered up as cannon fodder, and the people of Scotland are being promised that English Conservative MPs will just agree to vote this through for a referendum which, by definition, has already finished. Why should they do that? Why should they be prepared to put up with a solution that their own government has spent a year telling them is a bad solution?
So if I clarify from my own understanding, what you're saying is there's no substance to these claims or promises. They can't actually deliver, the three-party leaders. They can't whip their members in Parliament through the lobby to vote these changes through.
Well, they can't. I mean, they will try to. Mm-hmm. And it is, after all, in a sense, one of the heartwarming things about the Conservative and the Labour and the Liberal parties, that they are not automata. They're not like the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Right. They cannot be whipped like this. They've got a lot of free-spirited people in them, more than sometimes we recognise. And I think that when people are told in Westminster, we've made this promise on your behalf, they'll look at that as if I'd said to them, it's okay, I promised this guy here that he can have your wallet.
Yeah.
They'll say, you couldn't do that.
Yeah, there's already rumblings across Twitter and in columns as well that they can't deliver. Yes. Norman Tebbett's mentioned something about it.
Yes.
If yes, let's switch to that.
Yes.
Okay? That happy day.
Yes.
That may arrive on Friday, but will arrive at some point in the future, if not on Friday. What happens then?
There's going to be a very speedy process of negotiation.
Speedy?
Yes.
Right.
Civil servants are going to sidle up to ministers at 9 a.m. on Monday and say, we didn't think you'd want to know about this, Minister, but we have in fact prepared a contingency plan as to this department's position.
Right.
They have contingency plans for everything. Again, I think we shouldn't view the Home Civil Service, the British Civil Service, with contempt on this. That there are plans in the MOD to cater for the United States invading Britain. That's quite right too. It's a matter of brainstorming all eventualities. They'll have all their plans, they'll know what their position is. Some of it will be new to ministers because they're better off not knowing. They will then be struck in government.
Because it would trouble them too much.
Yes. There are things you're better off not knowing.
So you take yes, Minister as literal almost.
There's a lot of truth in yes, Minister.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yes. Fiction is less strange than fact.
Excellent.
But coming back to what will then happen, the obvious political point to make is that the coalition government has got control over this process for a few months. They're stuck with a general election, which at this point is unpredictable, in May of next year. The campaign really is going to get cracking not long after the new year. If they have not got this fairly well done and dusted in principle before Christmas, they have lost control of that process, and it will then have to go away until after the election. As of next week, they have control over the process on the RUK side.
Until May, is it? The election would be called in May.
It will be held in May. It will be called before then. They have control over this. They will then reflect upon the fact that this type of situation has happened many times before.
Where are you thinking of?
Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Canada. Let's go back. There's a long history, after all, of independence movements in English-speaking countries, populated from the British Isles, of which Canada is the second, the United States is the first. It's a bad example because it's warfare. But taking this, what happens in reality is that people get into negotiating issues of principle. They can separate out to a large extent the principle from the details. They can say, let's park that matter of detail. There are good international systems for doing this, in which you can say, let's first agree a formula for what will be the division, for example, of the assets and liabilities of the diplomatic service. You know, the property in the embassies, the buildings, the wine cellars.
I need to declare an interest here, Jonathan, because I actually did an analysis on the asset register, the National Asset Register in 2000, and the liabilities looking at Ukraine and the Czech Republic separation. So I have some insight to the actual location of the assets.
Yes, the assets location is not the point. I took an example just to illustrate this. They will then say, we can agree in principle that you should have whatever share on a formula. And having agreed that formula, they will then say, we need to work this through with some form of what might be an international court, it might be some form of arbitration. But you don't need to know on the day after independence precisely what the percentage is, precisely which country gets which wine bottles and which paintings from the Washington Embassy.
The pro rata formula for assets and liabilities will be developed in time.
The general language of the formula is largely already agreed between lawyers on the yes and no sides.
Right.
Again, on international precedents, it's not too difficult.
And there are a lot of recent international precedents, as you
Absolutely.
enumerate. Yeah.
The precise meaning of that formula, in terms of numbers, can be worked through. This is how people do contracts all the time. If I let an office building from a pension fund, we will have a rent review clause in it, and that will say that the rent in 5-10 years' time will be fixed according to a formula.
Yeah.
And if we can't agree what the figure is, somebody will decide what the figure is for us, and we go ahead happily and agree that we will rent 20, 25, 30 years. And nobody minds that we don't know what the pounds and pennies are at the end of this.
So immediately, say 7 a.m, what happens? If there's a yes declared, what happens immediately? Because I used to work in the city, so I would imagine something will have to be said to calm the markets if it was yes.
Well, I wonder. I think one of the problems is that, in spite of the very high quality of the debate in Scotland, a lot of the debate among people who just come to this brand new, with no idea that it's been talked about and thought about in this country for a long, long time. A lot of people come to this from the financial markets with a very short knee-jerk view, which is just based upon nothing. The Deutsche Bank, an analyst who said, "Oh, it's just going to lead to a depression." You know,
another Great Depression.
Another Great Depression.
Yeah,
absolutely bonkers. I mean, nobody else has agreed with this. No doubt, very intelligent young man who'd worked this out one night at home, but he. Rather striking that he should say this when one asks, well, who's responsible for the most recent recession?
Well, exactly, and I think what was interesting, Business to Scotland deployed a guy called Ian Blackford, who used to be managing director of Deutsche Bank in the Benelux countries.
Yes.
He was easily in place to rapidly refute the claims. So I think that's claim and counterclaim. But the general point you're making in terms of the level of political education here is well made. And in terms of the freshness and relative limited understanding at the moment of people elsewhere, because they've never really thought it would happen.
Yeah. That said, people get onto a learning curve on this pretty fast. And if you look at, for example, how world governments are going to react to this, they're not that stupid. They weren't born yesterday, and they will be well able to say, well, here is a new reality to which we can adjust fairly easily.
Because again, there's been recent precedents of that.
Well, when the United Nations was set up, it had something like 44 members. Now it's 5 times that. It's not a new experience. If you're the government of Brazil, or if you're a bank in Hamburg, it's not that new to say we have here an independent state that wasn't there last year. You can deal with it.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of the Foreign Commonwealth Office, there are issues around that, because who's going to recognise us first? Who's going to recognise Scotland first? Who do you think?
There'll be a race.
Excellent.
In much the same way that there were races to be the first state to recognise Israel after the War of Independence, or the United States after its. A lot of countries are going to want to say in future years, oh, of course, we recognised you on day one.
We were friends from the first. So Jamaica's going to win that race?
Oh, goodness knows. It may depend upon the clock as it goes around the world.
Absolutely, that's a very well-made point.
Yes.
If we come on to another area of your specialty and your cases that you work with, which is immigration and asylum, there's been some claims made that some people in the north of Edinburgh have been told, Polish people will be told that they will, if they vote yes, there's a likelihood that if there's a no, if there's a yes vote, there's a likelihood they're going to be
deported.
Can you say something about that?
Yeah. Firstly, although there's been a lot of feedback of such stories from Leith and North Edinburgh, I don't know if there has been in other parts of the country. And so I don't know if this is something which is just the Better Together people in Edinburgh going out on a limb of their own, or whether they're telling Poles this in Glasgow, Dundee and the rest of Scotland.
Right.
But whichever way it is, there's enough of the stories which say the same thing to show that this is not just the occasional rogue canvasser. And both sides have rogue canvassers. The way the story seems to work is that Poles are being told that if Scotland votes yes, and this is so declared on the 19th, that from that day they're going to be liable to deportation because they'll have no right to stay here. Now, if you deconstruct this, you ask, who on the 19th of September is going to be the government that makes them liable to deportation? It's the UK government. So you see straight away that in any view of the politics of independence, this is just nonsense, because the UK government is still part of the EU, and it cannot turn around and do this to Poles. Fellow members. It couldn't do it, for that matter, to anybody else from anywhere else in the world. It can't say it to Argentinians or Chinese, because they are here in its nature of a legal right.
Yeah.
And that would have to be ended, and that would need a parliamentary process and rights of appeal. Now, let's say then that the No campaigners have just misunderstood this, and what they mean isn't in September 2014, they mean in March 2016. Again, this is nonsense, because you ask at this point in an independent Scotland, who is going to be the government that does the deporting? That can only be, logically, the new government of Scotland. And standing the fact that the new government of Scotland is not going to want to declare itself at war with the world, on what possible basis would it start to say to people who live in this country, we are going to push laws through Parliament, and this would have to be done, because you've got to change the law to deport 100,000 people. We are going to push laws through Parliament so as to deport you back to your home country with a single suitcase or whatever. This is just detached from reality.
Right.
And the reality is, of course, that the Scottish Government has given promises that it will be, as an EU member, in compliance with its EU obligations. But even if you say that won't happen, as I say, it's like the Argentinians or the Chinese, there's no question of the EU, it still is unimaginable. Why on earth would it decide?
But it shows the extent, the desperation of Better Together canvassers in these examples, where they're sort of brandishing these threats. I
think threat isn't, is odd. It is a threat, but it's not phrased as a threat. It's phrased as a fear of uncertainty.
Right.
And we're constantly being told, you cannot promise that the government of Scotland will not pass a law to have all firstborn children murdered. That you cannot promise that it will not be suffering a plague of locusts. That you can't give us a guarantee that the temperature won't drop 20 degrees. And we are given all the time this idea that there is doubt and uncertainty. The Polish thing, of course, goes beyond that into actually a promise in the other direction. You are liable to deportation.
I think that's right. I mean, I know we've got 5 minutes left, so I just want to focus now on the parallel process that I've observed for some time and asked rather awkwardly once upon a time on Question Time, which is, where the no position stands just now, in terms of some of those voters will be anti-EU, and very shortly, if we were to believe the rhetoric, in the UK will be offered a poll on exit from the EU. Mm-hmm. And at that point, the position of the no here transforms on a UK level to a yes to exit. I wonder if you can comment on that, because it seems to me a parallel process in terms of the referendum for secession from the UK state and secession from the European state.
There's parallels, of course. Things that don't happen in parallel because they're not at the same time.
Sure.
The UK vote affects us if we vote for yes, because it will be very sad, of course, if we're still in Europe and England, Wales, Northern Ireland are leaving it.
Sure.
But you have to take the view, that's their right. If they choose to vote that way, it's a democracy. They're allowed to.
Absolutely.
And if they choose to do so, then yes, it will be the case then that we, in the first place, of course, we will be welcomed into Europe in that case with absolutely open arms, because in terms of naked power politics, we are the salvage from the wreck of the UK. Uh-huh. And they will love that the fact that they can say, at least we've still kept Scotland. But there will be problems. I personally think that the prospect that the England, Wales, Northern Ireland will vote to leave the UK is pretty slim. But you can't tell. It's too far in advance. That's the lesson of this referendum. You can't tell until it's happening.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point. I think one we could usefully end on. Jonathon Mitchell, it's been absolutely fascinating. I wish we could have taken a bit longer, but I know you have commitments the rest of the day. So thank you very much, and maybe see you tomorrow evening at some point during that long period. Thank you.
It'll be a long period.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yes. Hello and welcome to Referendum TV. You may notice something a wee bit different, and we're going to try something a wee bit different. I'm going to be interviewed by a long-time friend of mine, Sean Allan. So I've switched position because this is a wider lens area. Sean, welcome, and over to you, really.
Thank you, Kevin. I think in the interests of transparency in these difficult days, shall we say, we should really be upfront and declare that our friendship goes back a long way.
It does indeed.
So, if you get an easy ride, it's in the DNA, really.
Absolutely.
It goes back to childhood, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? So everybody knows where we're coming from here.
Well, can I just say that you are a bigger boy at school than me?
I've never been bigger than anyone, but older you were right the first time.
Fair enough.
Anyway, Kevin, you've developed a new career for yourself recently.
Yeah,
with this Parkinson-esque gig you've got here. So this is a nice opportunity for me to turn the tables on you.
Good.
You've been doing a lot of talking to people, some very interesting people, and I've been lucky enough to see some of these. But one of your favourite questions, how's this referendum been for you?
It's kind of it started from nothing almost and then began to consume me. When Alex made the decision, and he was committed to making the decision, I thought it was too early based on the general election polls for the Holyrood Parliament. But, the question was always going to be there, and I thought, well, if we've got to go for it, we've got to go for it. But, I'm a single dad, and I've got my boy to look after half the week, and I work the rest of the half the week, so there's very little I thought I could do. So what I have done is been active on Facebook and active on Twitter. That's the extent to which I could do things, and really that's begun to consume a lot of my spare time, such as I have. Subsequently, having come to Referendum TV during the festival, I happened to bump into the person who organises this and said that what I do for a living is talk to people, and so that's what I do here, really, just ask people questions. So it's been fascinating. I think it's the first time I've actually been politically active, though I did volunteer to help Margot MacDonald at the last election. So I canvassed with Jim in Ox Gangs at the Tesco up there and at Morrison's on the Gilmerton Road, and that was an interesting experience. And it was an interesting experience to be around Margot and to hear her thoughts on things. But beyond that, I think historically I produced an analysis for Alex Salmond along with the MSP Stuart McMillan on the asset register that I was working on at the Highways Agency at the time. So that was more a sort of expert look at things rather than being involved in the day-to-day mainstream of politics. So it's just been a rebirth. It's been a completely new experience for me.
Okay, you mentioned right at the start of your wee speech there that you thought maybe Alex Salmond was a bit unprepared for this whole thing, for the announcement, for the timetable. If he was unprepared, would it be fair to say that the nation, the electorate, was unprepared?
Well, I think
so. If you agree with that, how do you think we've conducted ourselves in it? Have we adapted quickly enough? Have we got to grips with the?
Well, there's a couple of things there. I mean, at the election for the last Holyrood Parliament, in the polls, it was showing the SNP quite a way off the pace, and within that was 2 weeks prior to the event. But in actual fact, he came in with a majority. Now that caught everybody unawares. It was almost like Colin Fox was telling me yesterday. You reckoned that he would be elected if there was 7,000 people, but in actual fact, because of the way the voting worked in 2003, I think it was, he was actually voted in on 4,500 people. So he was absolutely astonished. Hence those lovely jumps that he did. I think is memorable for most people of a certain age, where he jumped across Meadowbank, ecstatic. So I think by the nature of things, it's caught people on the hop, and basically you're being asked a question for the first time. For the majority of people, a lot of people have already come to this position within the party framework, but a lot of people have never really thought it was a possibility. So I think the adjustment that's been made has been astonishing. I mean, I think I echo Jonathon Mitchell's comments, I echo Colin Fox's comments, Jim Sillars, Jonathan Shaffey, John Drummond, Mary Lockhart, even Brian Costello's comments, which is the astonishing level of education, the high level which is conducted with. I disagree about any nastiness or viciousness. I think that's a fabricated construct. I don't believe that to be the case. It's mainly polite and civil. We have mutual friends that are very staunch in the way of voting no, Kenny Murphy and Willie Dunn. Now the banter there's been fine, but there's always that residual respect between us.
Do you think that that image that there has been bitterness and real conflict in this campaign, do you think that's come about accidentally, or do you think that's been a tactic, for want of a better word?
Well, I think it would suit people's agendas if we were the Yes camp were vile nationalists. Now, the difficulty with that, as you know, my partner's English, my son is half English, my stepson is English. It just, for me, on a personal level, it has no relevance whatsoever.
I think most of us would agree with that.
Absolutely, and it's certainly in my observation of events, it doesn't appear to have any relevance. But I think it suits some people's perspective because it would allow that binary yes or bad and no or good. And I don't think that's the case in either extent, because Kenny and Willie remain my friends. Unionist no voters remain my friends, and yes voters remain my friends too. So I think it's a false dichotomy. I don't think it has any relevance in the debate whatsoever.
Okay, good. One of the things, we don't know very much in this campaign for facts. What we've had is opinion after opinion over many, many months now. But one of the things we know for a fact is that what Scotland has now is its highest ever voter registration. Absolute record levels, very impressive, maybe remarkable levels.
Yeah.
Both sides really predict that that's going to transform into a very high percentage turnout tomorrow. How do you see that going? What's your own gut feeling, and what's your own head feeling from your own analysis of the polls? Is there a difference between the two? Is your head telling your heart something different about tomorrow?
Well, I'm an eternally optimistic guy, it just means I get disappointed more often than not. But then when it does come off, I'm always travelling hopefully. In terms of the polls, I'm not a pollster. Okay, I think this is a unique event that is very difficult to get involved in long trend analysis. I think that's a difficult thing to do. The methodology that different polling companies use, Colin Fox thinks they're pretty much on the money in terms of their predictions. but as Jonathon Mitchell mentioned earlier, the new voters, the 30,000 in the Lothians, the 110,000 in the month of August, they're not going to be registering to stay with the status quo. I mean, what would be their motivation level? I suppose the alternative argument would be that they suddenly realise the union's under threat. Though my gut instinct there and my head there suggests that would be more pro votes, pro yes votes. I think it's simply too hard to call at this moment in time. Even right up into opening the polls tomorrow at 6 o'clock.
It is hard to call. If I'm going to keep with you in this one, though. If you had to guess, what you must have a wee thing. Well, you've obviously got a desire. You want it to be yes, but do you think? Are you going to wake up? Well, you're not going to wake up. You're going to be up all night, of course.
I'll be here
sitting on this very sofa.
Absolutely, yeah.
Are you going to be sitting here at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning with a tired smile on your face, or with a very tired frown on your face? What do you think?
Well, you see, I've never seen this as a one-off set-piece battle. I don't see independence as an overnight event. I think it's a process. And I think the process from 97 or from 79 to now is all of a piece.
Yeah, there has to be a release tomorrow, though, doesn't there? Because there's been a build-up.
There has to be a release, but I think it's part of a process. And I don't want to use military terms, but it's the wars of independence. It's not the battles of independence. And in the long term, we're going to get independence. The momentum is utterly with yes. And the forces that are protecting no, as Jonathon outlined in terms of the constitutional issues, are really in a bit of jeopardy now because they've promised things that they can't actually deliver. So that's going to make them look bad in the eyes of the electorate. So either way, I'm convinced we'll get independence. Whether it's tomorrow or not, I don't know. I hope it's yes. But you've asked me, will I have a frown or a smile? I'll have a smile because this whole process has been absolutely invigorating. It's been energising. I think it's transformed the political landscape in Scotland. And so I can foresee, if it is a no vote, lots of reason for promise. Colin Fox was saying he's enjoying it so much he wants to go for another 2 years. Now, I would be...
That's a bit masochistic, isn't it?
Well, no, he's an enthusiastic political activist, and I've become far more enthusiastic with this process, and I would suggest that come Thursday morning, if it were a marginal no vote, then I would be looking at camera and saying, well, okay, this is the start of things. This isn't the end of things. We push on from here because what we've demonstrated is there's a tremendous amount of appetite for independence, and therefore we need to look at the political landscape in Scotland and see where the next battlefields are, which would be the elections of 2016. And, the coalition formed for yes, we'd work towards that.
Yeah. Okay. Some of the words you used there, if this interview was the other way around and you'd asked me my thought, I would have used some of those same words. If I had to sum it up in one word, for me it would be inspirational.
Right.
This campaign has been utterly inspirational for me. Has there been any moment that you can think, any particular moment in this campaign over the last 12 to 18 months, say, that's been inspirational for you, or that you've found?
It's incredible because it becomes a day-to-day thing. So last week becomes a long time ago rather than just the immediate past, because there's new things coming down the pipe, there's new articles, there's new graphics, there's new images, and so you're very much in the moment. But, I've been inspired by Referendum TV. It's a grassroots thing. Ian McWhirter suggested that, become the media, and, it's been interesting to be part of that process. Overall, I've been massively inspired by the diversity and the various interest groups that have come on board for yes. I think that's been a fascinating phenomenon. The individual humour has been incredible. Whoever that guy, we got his mate to ride him about with a tricycle in central Glasgow with the speaker blaring out the Imperial March and shouting out, "Bow down before your Imperial masters." I mean, I was helpless with laughter because it was very Glasgow. He was very gallus. He was being stared at quite ferociously by a number of MPs, and it was a sort of citizen response to this very disengaged elite that inhabit Westminster. So I thought that was certainly one of the highlights. But as I say, it's the press of events. That's all I can remember at the moment. I'd have to see a programme that reviewed the 2 years and say, "Oh, all right, I remember that." I think one of the other salient aspects for me was the appearance of George Osborne at the Point Hotel in Bread Street. Now, the arrogance with which he walked and swept away from Bernard Ponsonby will long live in the memory. Bernard was clearly furious, and rightly so. But you know, when something like that happens, you question whether it's designed to produce a yes vote. I mean, I'm not sure the Tories want Scotland that much.
Okay.
Because, you know, they're stuck in this place where people are saying, well, David, you're toxic. But, you know, you and I, our view on things is quite straightforward. You know, if you've got a case, argue it. Don't care if we don't agree with it, but at least we'll respect your position on it.
It's an easy case to make politically, isn't it? Because if we do win tomorrow, if there's a yes vote and we become independent, it's reasonable to think that if we're not condemning England and the rest of the United Kingdom to perpetual Tory governments, we probably are condemning them to Tory governments the majority of the time. You'd think that is something that David Cameron and George Osborne would want. But it's not that simple, is it? They're not surely that short-sighted.
I'm not
Economically,
sure. I'm not sure.
It's not going to be something they want, is it?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the English radicals in Owen Jones and Billy Bragg and the running sore for the Tories and whoever takes administration in England would then, and Wales and Northern Ireland would be the good example. If we organise things where LGBT rights are enshrined and we constitute our way of doing things effectively, that's a very, very strong antidote to a lot of the policies that are made on the hoof in Westminster.
Do you think, though, that there's the momentum, though, in England to build a campaign like that, or at least build it quickly? I mean, how long might it take for...
Well, it took us 2 years to get to where we are just now. And I think people like Billy Bragg and Owen Jones, who despite himself and despite his best efforts, I think acknowledges the inevitability of yes, and for the Scottish people, the desirability of yes, will then be forced in on themselves. And there will be a period of reflection. It will be like an amputation, I would imagine, for the RUK body politic. But thereafter, there will be some hard facing. There will be deep facing and hard truths to be faced. What does that mean for them in terms of their constitutional settlement? And I'm not so sure that the Tory majority would be eternal, because bear in mind that's possible because Scotland, to a certain extent, produces more for produces more for the UK state than actually receives. That's one of the clear economic lessons from this process. So I'm not sure that stasis can be projected into the future. I think things will change. Okay.
You've told me what you've found remarkable, what you found inspiring about the campaign. What's disappointed you most?
Oh, the BBC. I mean, the BBC, the newspapers, to a certain extent, I could understand, though the Scotsman's Nazi satire was an absolutely...
The Scotland on Sunday.
It was the Scotland on Sunday. Okay, thanks for the clarification. The Scotland on Sunday's decision, the editorial decision, was, I think, historically is going to be viewed with disgust, because to put the saltire in the shape of a Nazi was prefiguring the debate to say, to a certain extent, nationalists are bad, and anybody that sort of keeps the saltire aloft is some kind of crazy nationalist. It really disgusted me. Generally, though, the BBC, the observation on a day-to-day basis, the way it's editorialised, what's omitted, where the emphasis is put. But you know what? I like Alex Salmond. I'm one of these guys that like him. I admire him, I respect him, and I respect his intellectual ability too.
And I respect your view to your right to hold that opinion.
Absolutely.
Because it's not one I agree with,
That's
as you
okay.
know.
But the BBC, and particularly if I think of three examples, there was a woman on Good Morning Scotland who was asked him a question. So she said, blah, blah, blah. And then she jumped in straight away before he could actually answer. Now this seems to characterise the approach that's taken with Alex Salmond, whereby he's given no space to expound his view. And that for me is that's tantamount to bias in my eyes. Now there are more egregious examples than that, but that's something that's particularly irritated me. It's almost as if, don't let this magician speak or he'll hypnotise. the population. I don't think that's the case. I think it's perfectly possible to listen to an argument being developed in its various nuanced levels, and then picking up and coming back on that. I think barracking the individual, as you asked the question, isn't fair, it isn't objective, and it doesn't allow the case to be developed either from the Better Together campaign or the Yes campaign. So there's been a real disappointment, and I think that'll long endure past a yes or no.
Yeah. Well, of course, the media has come in for quite a bit of scrutiny, particularly from the Yes side, and the way they've covered the entire debate.
Yeah.
Personally, I think the media have got a bit of a right to take whatever views they want, even if they're quite extreme. But I would agree with you that I would exempt the BBC from that. They're not the media. They don't have an owner who's going to take an editorial view. And I think the criticism they've come with recently has been warranted, and I think the protests have been justified. Recently, though, people have been rallying round saying that this is wrong. Alex Salmond should condemn the protesters. Yes, Scotland should condemn the protesters. Do you agree with that? Or
well, it's interesting. I spoke to Brian Costello, the director of the Scottish Centre of NLP, and we were talking about associations and how it's actually expeditious for the Better Together campaign to heap associations, negative associations, on what they call cybernats and those BT truths. I think it's been a glorious eruption of grassroots Scots, people in Scotland who've thought, actually this isn't right, it's just not appropriate. So to challenge the powerful and the mighty has become an individual concern. I think that's a very important development. I think it's to be celebrated, not denigrated, and certainly not associated with not to have to heap negative associations on it. I would say, this whole debate, generally speaking, has been a credit to the peoples of Scotland, all of us, and it's only at the marginals, like a binomial distribution. It's just at the far ends that there's certain people who've possibly taken it too far. But generally speaking, I think the level. I got a message yesterday from a close friend of mine in London who says, "What I'm astonished by, Kev, is the level of education and the quality of the debate that's ensued." So I think it's political to denigrate and put people who protest in a box, but in actual fact, the reality is that it's a very energised and enthusiastic and empowered populace who do so. And it's funny because Thomas Paine, for me, is one of my political heroes, and a lot of what he wrote in Common Sense and various other pamphlets and books that he wrote around the French and American revolutions, he talks about an empowered citizenry, which is absolutely essential to then constitute a country properly, to establish it in the world. And I think Scotland, whether it's on Friday morning or in the near future, will have a very empowered, highly educated citizenry, and I think that's a very good thing and augurs well for the future.
Yes, I would agree with that. Tomorrow morning, you've been broadcasting all night.
48 hours time.
Yeah, sorry, yes, 48 hours time. It's a no vote.
Yeah.
Could be a lot of disappointed people. A lot of people who have educated themselves. They've not listened to the mainstream media. They've not listened to even the politicians that they think they're going to support.
Yeah.
They've gone out there. They've listened to friends. They've listened to colleagues. They've listened to people who they'd never heard of 12 months ago. They're now empowered. What are they going to do if there's a no vote?
Right. Okay.
Are they just? Are they going to be? They're going to be deflated. They're not going to go away, are they?
No. I mean, I think it's a football cliche, but I think it bears repeating here, which is, results are temporary, class is permanent. And I suppose the thing that is relevant here is we can organise things from that result. So, for example, if it looks like it's a no vote, we will hit our donation page, contribute, so that there's a flow of resources coming in here that we can then provide a platform to move forward from. And I think that's the way that Colin, Jim Sillars would look at. We'd be looking for a political mandate at some point in the future. So I think the thing to do is not lose momentum and not to go, geez. I don't have an expectation. I mean, the expectations I've had have been blown out the water by the vigour and energy of the Yes campaign. So have no concerns in that respect. That is not going to diminish. It's not going to abate. Those people that go, oh well, but I held out hope for that. Well, that's okay, but politically then you'd be a bit naive. You are fighting the forces of the British state here.
Absolutely.
You're fighting the vested interests, whether it be BP or other oil majors, or you're talking about these large impersonal financial companies, or the press, as we've talked about, or recently the likes of ASDA and various other organisations now. The people we have got mobilised, that energy is not just suddenly going to abate. Okay, I'm aware of the time, so we can begin to draw it to a close.
Okay, I think that was a fairly easy answer for you really. We, as a nation, we've always responded well as underdogs, weren't we? And we've always been good at picking ourselves up.
Yeah.
What's interested me for a wee while now, because I'm one of the optimistic, yes, when I've felt for a wee while that this is going our way and we are going to do it, if it's a yes vote, where does this big grassroots campaign go? Because we can't stop.
Well, you see, it's interesting. I mean, I've had some involvement with the Constitutional Commission, which is, there's no point in just transferring sovereignty from Westminster to Holyrood without it being properly constituted and organised. So here's the limits, here's the frame within which you can work.
And we've not been listening to the campaign from the top down so far, so we're not going to start on Friday morning, are we?
Absolutely. So that's going to be an empowered populace of different interest groups. We're going to say, okay, this is now what we want. So the actual grassroots and the town hall meetings and the village meetings, that sets a nice model, and people are now practised in that they can express their views, and their views will be listened to respectfully and engaged with. So I think there are various models with which to do that, and I think that'll be one of the first priorities beyond settling the market's nerves come 7 o'clock and the various resignations that might ensue. Joanna Lamont, possibly Ed Miliband, the pressure that David Cameron would then come under, possibly Nick Clegg as well. And there's a lot of repercussions of a yes vote in the immediate aftermath. But the first one will be settle the market, say that, of course we're going to have the currency, which we've always known anyway, and then the rest is up for negotiation.
Okay. Kevin Robertson, thank you very much. Thank you for making that very easy for me.
Thank you.
And I think we surprised everyone who knows us by talking for half an hour and not engaging in our potty mouths.
Not a sweary word between us. So thank you very much, Sean Allan there.